Okay, so is somebody recording? Yeah, we're going. Okay, so thanks again for showing up, everybody. And yeah, just a reminder that we are recording this. So if you don't want your face in the recording, you can just turn your camera off, but it'll mostly be our slideshow anyway. So we are going to be covering quite a bit of material during this talk, and there will be a couple of times for questions. So if you do end up having any questions, you can put them in the chat and one of us will be monitoring that and we'll get to those questions. And then you can also raise your hand during Q&A. Okay. So I want to start by acknowledging the land that we are standing on. This is always something that I think is important to do, but it feels particularly relevant right now. I and many others on this call are occupying the stolen land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people. However, there are over 500 tribes recognized today and many others that disappeared under genocide and colonization. So if you're in a different area or if you are in the Seattle area, I invite you to visit this website, nativeland.ca, and write whose land you're on in the chat. So a land acknowledgement is always relevant, but today, the Tacoma LNG project is a violation of treaty rights. Tribal rights have been violated since even before tribes were forced to sign treaties, but we haven't left this pattern in the past. What we're seeing today is literally an in-time example of treaty violations. This isn't just history, it's today. So right now we're seeing this continued violation, but we're also seeing some big wins that I think it's important to acknowledge and to celebrate. For one, a federal judge ordered the Dakota Access Pipeline to be drained and to cease its operations. That's a huge deal. About half of the state of Oklahoma was also recently declared to be a tribal reservation. People have been fighting for treaty rights to be upheld, and in some cases they're winning. Not enough, and it's often too little too late, but we're seeing that justice can be served. So I want to acknowledge that we're all part of several legacies here. For one thing, we are occupying stolen land. And treaties continue to be violated by the US government and giant corporations, like we'll learn a little bit more about today. But we can also be part of this legacy of allies who listen to Indigenous leadership and show up in a good way. And by doing this, we can help push things forward to right some of the wrongs. So just take a moment to honor yourself and for being here today, and also to honor the land that you're on and the people who stewarded it way before we were ever born. Thanks for being here today. Okay, so next we're just going to do some brief intros. So I'll start. I'm Anna Humphreys. I'm the volunteer coordinator for this leg of the project. I've been on the periphery of the Tacoma LNG project for several years. I've shown up for events and followed Indigenous leadership in multiple ways. And these days I'm one of the co-leads of the 350 Seattle in Solidarity team. Our team focuses on the many intersecting oppressions that allow climate change to happen, but we focus on things that aren't climate justice specific, showing up in solidarity for frontline communities. We do this with a node model where 4 or 5 of us focus on a specific issue, and then we convene as a larger team once a month. My node works in particular with Indigenous sovereignty, and we decided to focus our efforts on LNG resistance for the next several months. I'm really glad that we did, because the more that I learn about the Tacoma LNG project, the more appalled I am at what's happening and the health and safety violations that it entails, and also these horrendous threats to tribal sovereignty and land rights. I know this is a really important time to be involved. And I'll be co-presenting today with Stacey Oakes, who's been involved in this campaign for many years in many different ways. Stacey, could you say a few words about why you're here today?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Stacey Oakes. I'm an organizer with 350 Seattle, and I've been involved in this project, fighting this project since summer of 2017, and just started paying attention to it really organically after seeing Puyallup tribal members posting on Facebook that there was a pipeline going through their land without their consent, and that they wanted people to show up. And so I showed up, and 2 years later, still very much attached to the idea that we are going to defeat this project. And not only that, but potentially help clean up the rest of Tacoma too. And I'm just so thankful for being a part of all this work and for everything I've learned and everything I've got to do through doing this work. It's been an extremely rewarding part of my life, and really just kind of got a little bit inspired after going to Standing Rock for a little bit, and then came back and found out that there was something really similar to what was happening in Standing Rock, you know, right here in the Salish Sea, just a little bit away from us. And not only the environmental impacts of that, but I was really hit hard by how projects like this really steal and attack Indigenous sovereignty, and just feel really good about showing up in a space where we're fighting both things at once. So again, thank you so much to everybody joining us today, and we are going to defeat this project together.
Thanks, Stacy. It's an honor to be here with you today. So Stacy and I are both presenting this information as part of 350 Seattle's organizing effort, but many other people and organizations are involved, and Stacy's going to talk about some of that soon. Okay, so moving on. Today, I'm just gonna give a little overview. Stacy is going to take it for a little bit from here. She's gonna give us the full rundown on what LNG is and what's been happening in Tacoma and what's happening right now. And then she'll talk a little bit about the history of this resistance and what we're doing today. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. And then we're gonna take some collective action together, which is really exciting, and have a little bio break. When we come back, I'll introduce some teams that you can plug into. You'll be able to join a breakout room on the topic that strikes your interest the most, and learn more about what being part of that team involves and how to get connected. We'll do a quick report back after that, talk about collective next steps, and then hopefully have some time for more questions. So now that you've got an idea about what the next hour or so will look like, I'll pass it over to Stacy to give us the scoop.
Hey, thanks everybody. I hope everybody got to have a good chat in the breakout groups. And we're gonna go ahead and have a PowerPoint presentation to help give some visuals and just kind of help us go through, because this project, you know, it can actually be somewhat complicated because there are a lot of moving pieces and actually a lot of reasons why this project needs to be stopped. And so the visuals can definitely help and keep you from getting bored listening to me talk for so long. So in just a second, we'll have that PowerPoint up, and then we can go ahead and get started talking about what the Tacoma LNG is.
Oh, sorry, Stacy, I'll go ahead and share my screen again. Didn't realize that stopped.
Don't worry.
Okay, here we go. Slideshow from the right side. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, great. Wonderful. And then if people have questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat. And if they don't get answered during the presentation, then we'll bring those into that Q&A at the end also. So what is the Tacoma LNG? I know some of you already know, but usually every time we go through, there's always something new to learn. So let's take a look at what the Tacoma LNG is. And one thing that we have to look at to do that is who is building this project. And that is Puget Sound Energy, or otherwise known as PSE, when you see potentially your electric or your electric or gas energy bills. And what Puget Sound Energy is, they like to tout themselves as clean, safe, and local. But what they actually are is a for-profit gas and electric utility with shareholders. They have about 1.1 million electric customers and over 800,000 gas customers in Washington in over 10 counties. So one of the differences between what some people have for their power, which is like a public utility district, and what PSE is, which is a for-profit gas company, are actually really big differences. A lot of the rest of Washington actually gets to benefit by being part of public utility districts. And what that means is instead of shareholders, you have elected people running your power. So you have an avenue to tell them some of your preferences about where our power comes from, how much it should cost, what they should invest in. So it's a really different picture than shareholders, where there's not really an avenue that's great for you to rally back at them, especially when you have no choice what your energy provider is. So as we look at that, there are actually movements in a couple counties to drop PSE and to create public utility districts. That's something that can be done by voters' initiative. So there are ways to try and get PSE out of here, but you'll see that PSE is going to spend a lot of their money on stuff that, well, a lot of our money on stuff that they really shouldn't be. And one of those things is that they have become part of what's called Partners for Energy Progress, which was basically started in November of 2019. And what this nonprofit is supposed to do is it's aimed to promote the importance of natural gas and renewable energy as a significant component of balanced energy portfolio. So basically, they are spending over $1 million to try and keep us from moving away from fossil fuels. So things like where you'll see gas bans starting to pop up for new construction that different localities are trying to pass. This campaign is designed to squash those efforts. It's also about greenwashing. They're in the process, actually just recently, of aiming their PR at children. They came out with coloring pages and an online gas game where you run away from a gas leak. So it's just some really shameful stuff that's very reminiscent of like the tobacco industry doing some of their promoting. And these are some of the things PSE spends our money on, lobbyists, political campaign contributions. Their CEO salary in 2018 was over $7 million. So this is why Puget Sound Energy is one of, if not the most expensive energy provider in Washington, because they use their money on things like this. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And so now that we know who's doing this a little bit, let's talk about what LNG is. A lot of us don't know what that stands for. And so what LNG really stands for is liquefied natural gas. But what is natural gas? That term was developed, I believe, back in around the 80s as part of a different PR campaign. It used to be known as methane gas, which is the actual gas that it is. And nowadays, because of the way that gas is produced, or well, the way it's extracted from fracking, you could also change that term to be synonymous with fracked gas, which is how we like to try and refer to it instead of those greenwashing names of natural. So methane, why is it dangerous? Methane is over 86 times more potent at warming the atmosphere than carbon. So that means potentially, you know, you have a much bigger impact for every kind of molecule of methane that's out there. With extraction moving towards fracking, you're going to find that it requires a lot more energy and a ton of water consumption in order to get that gas out of the ground, because we've already kind of used up all of the easy to get areas of gas. We'll go ahead and go next. And so what are some of the costs of extracting gas? And when I say costs, I know we use that term synonymously with a price tag a lot of times, but I think we need to take the language back on that, because costs go far beyond a price tag. So what other costs are there? There's costs to the environment. So you're looking at poisoned water tables from those fracking chemicals. You're looking at earthquakes when they inject that poisoned water back into places. You're looking at deforestation over the areas that they're going to extract, or even to build refineries. Then you're also going to have impacts, you know, to the community. We're going to have health impacts to both the extraction and refinery area communities. Along both the pipelines and in the extraction areas specifically, you're going to find what's called man camps. And that's going to increase cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women, drug abuse, domestic violence. And just to explain a little bit of what man camps are, if you've never heard that term, the reason why that happens is because to do these projects, you need really large workforces living near the job sites And so what that means is it ends up being mostly men. They're away from their families or don't have families. They're in communities they have no ties to. They're going to get really high pay, but not have much time to spend that money or to blow off steam or to blow off all of the mental and physical stress from this extraction job. And so what that leads to is trouble for the communities they're near. You're going to notice that these man camps tend to be near Indigenous communities quite often. There's also going to be the violation of treaties and sovereignty. You're going to have land and resource theft via violence and eminent domain. And you know, when we talk about violence, that takes on many forms also. All of the violence from the Dakota Access Pipeline was very visible. Some of the violence you see in Tacoma around this project comes in the form of intimidation. You know, during prayer vigils, you'll see, you know, just hordes of riot cops come out and stand intimidating across from people that are singing, people that are praying. So there's threats of violence involved. You're going to see up in the extraction area going on currently that the Unistitan people, you know, they've been pushed off their own unceded territory at gunpoint. The courts are helping. The RCMP were going to use live rounds and fire on people, unarmed people, if they decided not to get off and move out for this natural gas pipeline company to come in. So this is not just about the past. These things are happening today. And that area up where the Unistitan people are is up in BC. And all of the gas for this Tacoma project is supposedly going to come from that greater BC area. So we are complicit on this end of the pipeline to the things happening where they get this gas from. So knowing all of those background things around the gas, let's talk about specifically what's going on in Tacoma, because there's a lot of different kind of things that can happen around the fracked gas. So with this particular project, it has a lot of moving pieces. So one of those pieces is the refinery. That's going to be giving off emissions 24 hours a day. You're going to be looking at a giant storage tank. You've probably seen pictures of that big storage tank in some of the stuff that we send out. I think it was in the first slide from today. So you're going to hold that 8 million gallons of this gas. Part of this is also the reason that they said they need to do this project is to fuel tote maritime ships via, and they're going to do that via pipeline. Tote Maritime has an operation directly across the street from the LNG site. And Tote is a shipping company, and these two ships that are the only customers signed on right now for this whole project, what they do is they take shipments up to Alaska, you know, something that does need to be done, but they're saying they need to do it in order to meet air regulations put out by the International Maritime Organization. Their ships already met those standards without converting to LNG gas. So there really is no reason for this project to go through, with them being the only stated customers and it not being a need. The other thing that's going to happen down there is what's called bunkering. And bunkering is basically providing gas for maritime ships. And we recently learned in one of the latest environmental impact statements that they plan to use about 75% of the gas that goes through this facility for bunkering. And one way to do that, in order to help fill these ships up, you have what's called bunkering barges. And that means that there's going to be large ships with kind of big container tanks on the ship, and they'll use that like basically a floating gas station, and go out to other places nearby and help fill up ships that run on LNG. So that means you could be seeing these bunkering barges up in Seattle filling up ships, and all kinds of other places, and a lot of increased ship traffic in our Salish Sea. They also, PSE has been advertising that they have railway access to industrial customers, and they were advertising this way before shipping LNG by rail was legal. That just happened recently from the Trump administration. And shipping by rail can be very dangerous. And another thing that we have is trucking bays. So then you're also going to see tanker trucks filling up and potentially driving around with the explosive gas all over our roadways as well. So it's a really big operation with a lot of different arms. Let's talk about why the project is so bad. So this picture that you're seeing right now is the Port of Tacoma. This is not all that project, but I want you to see what Tacoma looks like in the port. And then, so all of those big tanks, that's the type of tank that the LNG would be in. A lot of those are full of fossil fuels. It's unfortunately kind of an area where if stuff isn't kind of nice enough to be in Seattle, Tacoma gets kind of that sacrifice zone, and this is where it goes. That water that you can see is part of an estuary, and that estuary used to actually, all of that water used to be where those things are. And so the loss, you know, what could be there is huge. So that's part of why we need to help clean up Tacoma even after we beat this LNG project. So what's the harm? There's actually kind of a bunch of different reasons. There's sovereignty and racism concerns, there's safety, there's climate emergency, public health, and then you know, some different economic concerns. So we'll just talk about each of those for just a moment. And so first is sovereignty and racism. And we know that extraction and refineries of fossil fuels are often located on and next to indigenous land or marginalized communities. And in this particular project, there has been no consultation with the Puyallup tribe by any agency involved or Puget Sound Energy. This facility is located right on the edge of the Puyallup Reservation and within the boundaries of the Medicine Creek Treaty. So the tribal concerns have been ignored and dismissed regarding safety, health, and climate concerns for years now. And one of the things too that we've been fighting is that construction began long before it was permitted. Construction began in 2017 of the facility, and I believe pipeline work may have even started earlier than that. But the permit for the construction wasn't granted until December of 2019. So for 2 years, they worked on constructing this facility without a building permit. And that permit was through Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. And Puget Sound Clean Air Agency is the agency that, if you were part of any of the resistance where we were doing hearings and putting in comments for the last permit, that's Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. They did issue a notice of construction violation, I believe back in 2017, and they chose to take no action instead of enforcing a stop of work. They say that they could decide to issue a fine later once the project is operational. So also one of the, another big concern for a lot of us is that the Northwest Detention Center is located very near this site, and it holds daily over 1,500 detained immigrants, and it's less than 2 miles away from this facility. And that means that they are daily breathing in really unhealthy air. Think back to that picture you saw of the Port of Tacoma. They breathe in all of that. And something that's just kind of just hits me in a really hard way is that over these couple of years while we've been fighting this project, it's been pointed out that there is no evacuation plan for the people detained. There is only an evacuation plan for the workers, which means that if there was a really bad accident or something that happened, the workers could leave and they would just leave people in the cages, regardless of if there's an explosion or really harmful things that have gone into the air from an explosion. If anybody would like to learn more about the fight to close the Northwest Detention Center, please follow La Resistencia on Facebook or sign up for their emails. They're doing amazing work down in Tacoma and have regular actions down there. I'd like to point out another intersection of how the racism involved against immigrants and the racism involved in siting facilities are really connected. So the same city council, Tacoma City Council, they took money from PSE while okaying these, they were in charge of the environmental impact statement and the whole permitting process. So they were taking money from PSE while deciding it was okay to move forward with no health impact study, no safety studies, and methane value data that's over 10 years old. They also were okay moving on with no consultation with the Puyallup tribe. So those same people also take money from Geo Group, which is who runs the Northwest Detention Center, which is a for-profit prison. So they take that money, and if they wanted to, they could end the lease for that Northwest Detention Center, but choose not to. So again, you're gonna see that we are fighting the same system of oppression in multiple fights. So that moves us on to safety. So if you look at the photo in here, the green line is part of the reservation boundary for the Puyallup tribe. And then you'll see kind of little orange squares. That's where the facility will be. So you can see it is right on the edge of the reservation. But I also want to point out that, again, I said it's on Medicine Creek Treaty territory. The Medicine Creek Treaty goes out into the water, I believe out to around where the 2 miles out into the water is. So it is definitely on treaty territory. And that's a treaty that involves multiple tribes, not just the Puyallup tribe. The little red dots you're going to see in there are schools and daycares. There are over 40 schools and daycares within the 3-mile potential blast zone of this facility. Again, homes are in less than a mile. A lot of those homes are going to be Puyallup tribal members, potentially on original allotments. In general, this is a terrible place to be building both the LNG and some of those other explosive holding tanks that you saw. All of that that you see beyond the reservation near that orange actually did not used to be land. Like I said earlier, that was all estuary, it's mud flats, it's tide flats. And what happened was the city decided and the port decided back in the early 1900s to scoop up a bunch of toxic fill from an old Asarco site, dump it into the water, dump it onto the tide flats, cover that over, and create new land so that they had access to the port on the other side of the Puyallup reservation. So that land does not belong to them. That is stolen estuary. Part of the problem of doing that on a safety perspective is that that soil is now prone to liquefaction, which means if there's an earthquake or another large disturbance, it could act like quicksand and buildings could literally sink into the soil, into the water. It definitely not a good place to be building something that could have safety hazards. It's also on an earthquake fault line. It's in the Lahar lava flow zone for Mount Rainier. It's clearly next to other explosive fuels, so you could have some sort of chain reaction that went off as well. It wouldn't even have to be the Tacoma LNG that caused it in order for it to have an issue. We know that PSE also has a bad safety record, so we're working with people that we can't trust that are building this. In 2016, the Greenwood neighborhood of Seattle had a natural gas explosion because PSE never actually shut off the gas going to a building that had stopped using gas in their service. That's something that could happen to homes too. If you ever decide to shut off your gas, you need to make sure that they get that gas line out of there. There was also, just a couple weeks ago, a gas leak in downtown Puyallup, the city, and they had to evacuate the whole downtown area and the roads around it just for a leak. So we know that we're not working with someone with a good track record for safety, as well as they were building without permission on the construction, which means there was not anybody that came out and inspected their construction to make sure that they were doing it correctly. So that blast zone of 3 miles for the tank is based off of a safety modeling that some of the local groups had done on the same type of software that fire stations use. So we're looking at, if there was a large explosion, you're looking at LNG can burn hotter than jet fuel. It can melt steel. If you're too close, you would be incinerated immediately. And you can get third degree burns, second degree burns by being out, I think over a mile away. If you're just exposed for about 30 seconds, there's a great clip in a documentary that goes into a lot of the safety hazards. So, and when we think about that, you know, we're like, wow, this is really dangerous for Tacoma. But again, Tacoma gets looked at as a sacrifice zone. I think we also need to make sure that we're thinking about the fact that when you talk LNG by rail, LNG bunkering, you have those same safety concerns of explosion, death, incineration. You're bringing those wherever that bunkering barge is. You're bringing that next to any of those railroad tracks that might try and ship that stuff off. So, you know, for example, there's railroad tracks that would be potentially carrying that LNG right in downtown Seattle, across from the piers, near the big Ferris wheel, just huge potential for harm. That 3-mile blast zone means in Tacoma that you're potentially at about over 100,000 to 200,000 people could be affected. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide there. With public health, so we know that there's, you know, going to be both at the extraction and refinery area, there's going to be impacts. Some of them are going to be the same and some of them are really going to vary. But one of the things with the extraction area is that they make this slurry of really toxic chemicals that they won't even say what all's in it. And they mix it with water and it's used to frack the rock open. And then that poisoned water is putting these tailing ponds, which end up leaching into the groundwater. You're also, for that area, going to be getting a ton of huge diesel trucks. And if you've never looked at the size of a truck for a fracking operation, look them up. They are massively huge. I didn't even realize trucks came that big. And so you're going to be using a lot of equipment that's going to be harming the air in that area as well. You're looking at cancers, fertility issues, birth defects, lung disease, asthma. And then another kind of side health effect is that we also have to think about, for both extraction and refinery area, there might be impacts from both, you know, habitat removal, the man camps, the loss of cultural spaces. Those things, the stress of all those things can take tolls on health as well, in ways that aren't really recorded. In the refinery, I know that right here in Tacoma, they're going to be putting out benzene, xylene, toluene, particulate matter. We now know too that particulate matter is the #1 environmental cause of premature death. And we also now know that particulate matter, that COVID-19 can be carried on particulate matter. So even if you weren't near other people, but you enjoy going outside, that particulate matter can carry risks to those neighborhoods. Another thing that's somewhat recently been kind of brought to attention is that for people that cook with gas in their home, you're actually getting potentially really negative health effects for you in your home. They're starting to discover that even if you were using that stove outside, it would be unhealthy. You know, you don't see the emissions coming out of there, but that's going to be a big part of childhood asthma and asthma in other individuals, heart problems, lung problems. So we need to help educate around the dangers of indoor gas stoves, especially knowing that PSE is countering that in that PR campaign that they're doing. They are paying YouTube influencers to cook with gas and talk about how amazing it is. So this again goes back to, this is one of the ways they use our money. And shows what a big job we have ahead of us in order to help re-educate people. If you want to know more about any of these health impacts, Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility is a great local place to find more in-depth information on all the health effects of fracking, refinery areas, and cooking with gas. There's also the indirect health impacts from a worsening climate. And again, we got to think about the social justice impacts of this. And we already know that Indigenous, island communities, the global South, and here in the US, Black and Brown communities will feel the effects of climate change, both first and worst. And it's often going to be, you know, the people that are least responsible to adding to the crisis. And again, you're looking at things like more asthma, more lung disease, premature death from particulate matter, heat-related deaths and illnesses, lives lost to increasingly severe natural disasters, and also the effects of lack of clean water and food security. So there's a lot of impacts from this clean, safe, local product that they're trying to push on us. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So climate emergency. I know that most people that have joined us already kind of know a little bit about why fossil fuels are kind of a no-go for us from this point on. But basically, you know, gas is kind of the next big fossil fuel fight. For a while, it was, well, coal is bad, but we can use this. You know, we can use oil. Well, oil is bad, but we can use natural gas. And so a lot of the coal facilities that are closing, companies like PSE are actually trying to open up gas facilities to replace them instead of opting for actual renewables. You know, because they want to hold on to that power. And a lot of the people that run these companies also have their own personal investments in those fossil fuels. So with all these greenwashing campaigns, gas is the next huge fight that we need to push back on all that greenwashing. And they have been doing that greenwashing, like I said, since the 80s, but really kicked it into high gear lately. They spend millions on that. They actually, I believe that they spend more than Amazon even sometimes on lobbyists and campaign contributions, which is kind of crazy to think about when you think that this is a company that's only here in Washington and Amazon is global. So it's, you know, it's pretty amazing the amount of money they spend on making sure that we stay hooked on gas. And as we all know, the International Panel on Climate Change says keep it in the ground. We cannot switch one fossil fuel for another, and we are out of time for transition fuels and bridge fuels. So we don't need to go into a lot of detail on that. I think most of us on here are pretty understanding around the climate emergency. So money. This is a great talking point if you are trying to convince people that really don't care about the environment or Indigenous sovereignty, because it kind of affects a lot of people in Washington, whether this facility is close to you or not, and whether you care about those things. PSE has been able to get the State of Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission to agree that regular residential customers would have to pay 43% of the construction costs of this facility, even though when you look at how much use regular residential customers would get would be less than 2% over the lifetime of the project. They say that this facility will be used for backup power on the coldest few days of the year. However, if you look at demand, demand is actually going down, not up, because of making different things. Sorry, I'm losing my word here. But making things run on less energy, even though we have the same amount of people using. So I think that's to the tune of about 133 million or so that PSE residential customers are going to end up paying on their bills. And that's for gas and electric customers, whether you're in Tacoma or not. The other ways it's going to cost us, kind of not indirectly, would be when something bad does happen. So LNG, for this LNG project, it's actually under a shell corporation. So instead of Puget Sound Energy, the company building this is Puget LNG. And so they would be able to say that, to declare bankruptcy and just walk away if something were to happen with this project. That means that if there was an explosion, taxpayers would have to try and clean up the mess. That they would, kind of move away from any liability. And this is a really common practice. Other taxpayer type costs are going to be things like they have to build a fire station and they have to staff that fire station every year. So the people in Tacoma are going to be paying for that. There has to be road upgrades that they haven't done yet. They offered a bunch of tax breaks to PSE to do this. And then the fossil fuel market, as a lot of people may already know, is not a great investment. It's not pulling out the returns. It's really reliant on banks funding these projects. So any help you can do on divestment campaigns is also great. And in general, we're going to see that with LNG specifically, they're trying to get a lot of this stuff built quickly because they know the market is going down. And these companies like PSE, the shareholders, are actually guaranteed a 10% return on investments through our residential billing. So they don't really care if the facility sometimes gets used or not. They don't care if it was a good monetary investment. The shareholders get paid just by building it. So that's part of why we need to stop some of this. And something else to think about is that we are complicit when we have to pay those PSE bills. You know, we talked about where the gas come from, all of the bad things incorporated in that. And so as a PSE customer, to know that you're paying to help evict Indigenous people from their land, that you're paying to help build man camps, that you're paying to help, you know, to poison the water. I feel so lucky for being up in Snohomish County and being part of a PUD and not having to pay PSE, because I would hate that feeling of knowing that my money was going there and that I had to be complicit. And they keep filing for rate increases and will eventually file for a rate increase again for paying for this project. Let's go ahead and talk about kind of the history of this fight. And No LNG 253 refers to the area code 253, which is Tacoma by phone. So, and the picture right there is when we delivered over 140,000 gas comments to Governor Inslee. So one of the main things about this history is that the Puyallup tribe, Puyallup water warriors, they have been the heart of this resistance. So Puyallup tribal members, known as the water warrior movement, was really kind of a big start to pushing back on this. And this movement, it called out, like I said, how I first heard about the project is that there were Puyallup tribal members that called out the pipeline work that was happening on the reservation in the summer of 2017. And they began to lead small groups and vigils across from the construction. And since then, they've continued to lead actions, ceremonies, gatherings, public comment sessions to the city of Tacoma and other agencies. And then kind of another piece of that fight would be the actual tribal council, which is a sovereign government. And they have led the legal pushback. So you're going to see things like they challenged the shoreline permit. They sent a construction stop work request for the unpermitted work to all the agencies involved. They challenged and continue to challenge the inadequate environmental impact statement that lacks health, safety, and true climate data. And they're part of this legal challenge against the final permit from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency that's going to be heard in October. And really the water warriors and tribal council have set the tone for this resistance as peaceful and prayerful. And they've also been sharing passion and wisdom with allies that have shown up to help. And so that's really where we try to ground everything that we do in this fight, is within those basic tenets that the Puyallup tribe have laid out for us. And there's actually an amazing documentary that was shot mostly with frontline footage from 2017 and 2018. And what this does is it focuses on telling the story of this fight from Puyallup perspectives. And it was put together by Native Daily Network, which is a nonprofit that kind of, again, created out of some of this work and out of watching all the stuff happening at Standing Rock. And later in the workshop, we'll actually be looking at how to help potentially do watch parties. This film is available for viewing as well as available for helping do watch parties. And we have an awesome toolkit to help people plan screenings. And I thought right now, just to get another little piece of how the Puyallup tribe is involved, we'll just go ahead and watch the trailer.
Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes have been actively existence for 164 years. Today, they are fighting to stop a liquefied natural gas refinery being completed on the territory of the Puyallup people. Ancestral Waters is their story.
So if we issue a stop order, guess what should happen? Work should stop.
I'm a little bit passionate because I'm here talking about my life, the way of it. You understand me?
Who pays the price is going to be Anna, Dakota, Anna's kids, Dakota's kids, my grandkids.
This is happening live. Share this out. They are in SWAT gear. They are planning on making a large arrest.
This is the spirit of the people. Fight back. Fight against corporate greed. Corporations' greed has no limits.
I don't ever want my kindness to be mistaken for weakness. I come from resilient people, and I have to fight for those people. Even as an elder, I mean,
He's being arrested. Dakota is being arrested for defending his sovereignty. Chester's now getting arrested.
I don't care anymore. PSC is my enemy. You're my enemy. I will fight you. My people will fight you.
Mother Earth will be here. She will recover. We won't.
No, the law is the law. Where's their permit? That's all we asking. Can we see your permit?
I've seen that film probably 10 to 15 times, and it still hits me really hard every time I watch it. There's just so much passion and in that film. So hopefully everybody can get to watch that soon. And kind of some of the other resistance that's grown out of that is we've had huge resistance kind of pop up over the years. There's been over 100 organizations and community groups that have signed or written letters against this project. There's over 65,000 individuals that have made comments or signed petitions. There's been a whole bunch of resolutions, and that includes from the City of Seattle, the Washington State Democratic Central Committee, many legislative districts and caucuses. 17 tribes from the affiliated tribes of the Northwest have sent a letter to Governor Inslee. And eventually Governor Inslee himself admitted that he could no longer in good conscience support the construction of the Tacoma LNG due to climate impacts. So where is the fight now? Basically, we're really kind of ramping stuff back up because there is a legal appeal of that final permit from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency that's going to be heard in court in October. Construction is, like we talked about, ongoing, and the publicly stated completion schedule says that they'll be done with construction in spring of 2021. So our goals from now through October and potentially beyond are to keep the Tacoma LNG in public attention all around the Salish Sea. So we're looking for ways to get media attention, to spread solidarity art through Salish Sea neighborhoods, to get elected officials hearing about the project, to spread education on why the project's bad, to have a presence on social media. So we have kind of a big job, but again, a lot of great tools to work with and so many people that care about this project, either just recently or again for years now. So I think this is a great time to take some questions.
And we don't actually have any in the chat, Stacey. We haven't gotten any that haven't been answered yet. So let's take a moment, see if anybody has any. But super comprehensive presentation.
Thank you. Sorry, there's a lot to talk about with this with this project.
I was just going to ask what, other than sort of keeping the public eye on, like, what specific actions we can plan on signing up to take in the next couple of months.
Yes, and we are actually going to, Anna's going to help lead us through that as soon as we're done with the Q&A.
There's another question, Stacy, from Jonathan. On what grounds is the permit being appealed?
Yeah, there's two different legal appeals, but they will be heard at the same time. One legal appeal is from the Puyallup tribe, again, as a sovereign government, and the other appeal is by Earth Justice, and they are representing a good handful of groups, mostly environmental groups, but also like Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I believe Earth Ministry, and those two different appeals do have different grounds that they're going on. So the Puyallup tribe will have some additional grounds in theirs that also deal with not having any consultation done, and kind of both take slightly different angles. You can actually read either legal appeal. They are public, and we could potentially send that out as another link in our follow-up email after this. But some of the main points were going to be, again, a lack of safety analysis. There was no safety modeling done prior to them finalizing the environmental impact statement. There has not been a community health analysis to see what that refinery and the trucking and other things would do for public health in the area. And they're also using methane values that are over a decade old and kind of cherry picking a lot of data in order to try and make it say that this is going to help the air, not harm the air. And they say it'll be a positive for climate if we build this, that this is going to help us.
Is there work being done in Snohomish County? You said there wasn't any PSC in Snohomish County, but South Snohomish County has, I have gas from PSC, unfortunately. Edmonds, Linwood, apparently their pipeline runs through Edmonds and Linwood.
Yes, and so if you're up here in Snohomish, your electric would be through the PUD, but the PUD does not provide.
PSC.
Yeah, so I don't have gas here in my house, so I don't have a PSC. But yeah, if you have gas in your house, then you have PSC, and the only way to kind of get around that would be either to help with those movements to create a PUD, kind of, or to also with the gas side to change over, convert your stuff to electric, and then ditch having gas service. But even if you're not a PSC customer, it's important to fight this because, again, the other impacts are going to affect all of us. And again, the taxpayer kind of heft from potentially something going wrong would be felt by all of us also.
Thank you, Stacy. We've got a couple more questions in the chat, and we're going to have to start wrapping up the section as well. So I just wanted to combine the two of them and quickly answer another. I know that Marilyn and another person had asked if this presentation could be shared. So we'll talk about that as a coordinating team, but I'm sure we can, we'll have the recording and we'll send that out that can be shared. And I'm sure we can share the slide deck with the update that John sent in. The two questions that are in the chat, and then we'll have to cut it off at this point, is, well, I can answer this question. One, JJ asked if, I understand if PSC does not have all the necessary permits. If this is true, how is PSC being allowed and by who? And the other question is by Marlene, why, if the governor is against it, we cannot get a bill passed to block this? And it also seems our federal reps have been pushing LNG instead of coal. And why? Are they not knowledgeable about the risks?
So, I mean, unfortunately, part of the reason why, if they really don't have the permits, why are they allowed to continue? That's going to potentially partially go back to systemic racism. It's going to go back to kind of, the dangers of capitalism that we see, that the people who could stop this, most of them take donation, political campaign contributions from Puget Sound Energy, so which is legal, and then they get to also rule, like the city of Tacoma. I believe all of the council members took PSE money, and they were allowed to decide if we need some of these other things in the environmental impact statement. Governor Inslee basically tries to just, well, even though I don't support it anymore, there's nothing I can do. And he also says the same thing about the treaty concerns, which is really, really distressing. Because this is in a legal process, Governor Inslee really shouldn't be kind of trying to step in and do something right now, and that's kind of where he sits on that. He could have tried to step in earlier, especially on the grounds of treaty rights. You know, he is the highest executive branch of this state, and the treaty violations were brought to his attention in numerous ways by the tribe. There's been reaching out. He has, to my knowledge, still never taken the tribe up on their formal request of trying to get a government-to-government meeting. So there's a certain amount of avoidance, and something else that we see all the time with all kinds of permitting processes is that each agency is allowed to look at this one tiny pinhole, and if it doesn't violate their stuff, they have to approve. And then this other agency gets to look at this one piece, and then they approve. And when you bring up these other issues, they say, it's not my job. And so there's just a lack of responsibility around permitting in the state in general, which is extremely scary. And then again, why don't people help and kind of step, you know, to the higher side of what they could be doing with their job? And that goes back to, again, some of the systemic racism and just, you know, the way that things have seemed to work with doing business as usual so far. I think I answered those first two questions. I forgot what the other last bit was. If there was part I didn't answer there, sorry.
I think we could probably, I'm making notes about the unanswered questions and we can address them in our wrap up email. Perfect. Since we need to continue.
Great.
Okay, so we're going to move on and do a little bit of collective action, because I bet that we're all feeling a little bit like frustrated and like, oh, what do I do? So we're going to talk about like different teams that you can get plugged into after this. But right now we're actually doing a social media storm today. And I know a lot of us probably try to avoid social media, but it's a really powerful way to make our voices collectively heard. So could somebody put the link to the social media toolkit in the chat, please? And what we're going to do is basically just post, we've got a bunch of template posts laid out in this chat or in this doc that you can just copy and paste onto your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, and tag PSE. We've got the ways to tag Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook here at the bottom. So we're trying to do this all today so that our voices are really heard. You know, it's more powerful if a whole bunch of us are projecting this way at once, rather than, you know, if it's just kind of trickling in over a couple days. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We've got 5 minutes on the clock, and if you need a quick bio break while you're doing that, go for it. Did I miss any info, Stacy or Val there? Oh, Lily added that they're posted to the 350 Seattle Facebook and Instagram that you're welcome to share. Okay. Oh, bye, John. Oh, and by the way, if you do need to leave, anybody, we will be sending out a follow-up email with a form that includes some of the information that we're going to share about which teams are available and how to get involved. Okay.
I wonder, are we just, do you have a way to show any of the images, or it's just in that link? The colored images are great.
Yeah, it's going to be on that link.
A few of us, someone from 350 Tacoma and myself, made some of our own coloring pages with a little bit more accurate info about gas. And so those are also in the toolkit. You can print them and color them out and post at PSE. There's also a free app called Colorscapes, where you can color it in or use Photoshop and post those at PSE too. Sometimes art and visuals can really get people in a way that that words don't, and grab people's attention. So there's some really cool images in there.
Question? Can Can I ask you a question? You're not hearing me. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, schools. Is PSE allowed to send these out to schools? Their coloring?
You know, I'm not sure what PSE would be allowed to do with schools. I think that would be determined by the school or school district. But what they are doing is they kind of created a something called Energy Safe Kids, and so they do this under that umbrella of this kind of group called Energy Safe Kids, and that's where they
I see.
through. So if a school unfortunately did partner with Energy Safe Kids, then yeah, it could potentially get into schools. There's none that I know of, but I haven't done a lot of research.
That's the way, no offense, but that's the way in World War II things were passed along. It was through schools. So how do we, yeah.
So again, social media storm, coloring pages, huge shout out to Stacy for making these. They're so awesome. And that's in direct response to PSE's greenwashing that targets kids. So let's move forward and talk about how we're going to accomplish what we want to accomplish through teamwork. This is a model, but all of this is really, you know, up to, it's subject to change based on who's part of this and what people are bringing to the table and what ideas come about. So it's really, you know, a constant process of co-creation. So we were originally going to do breakout rooms, but I think we got a little bit over ambitious in our agenda. So we're just going to have the team leads or the people who are sort of here representing the teams talk briefly about what we're going to be doing on these teams. And just try to, you know, you can sort of think about which ones you're the most attracted to or which ones speak to your strengths. And we're going to send out a form. We'll also put a link in the chat at the end, something that you can fill out. Let us know how you want to plug in. And then as the volunteer coordinator, I'll get back to you and plug you into whichever team you'll be moving forward with. So first, oh, sorry, that's my dog. She's new to the family and a little anxious. So forgive me if you hear some barking. So for education and outreach, I can just touch on that briefly. So we showed you the Ancestral Waters documentary trailer. It's a phenomenal movie. And I think that just like having all of the visuals for what, for like the violation of the treaty rights and the resistance is a really powerful way to help people really want to engage in this. So this is the main focus of this education is to have people see it and facilitate discussions with each other and with panelists. So we're looking for people who maybe have some experience with outreach to different communities and who maybe have some experience facilitating conversations. We have a really solid established toolkit for putting on these screenings. So you wouldn't be starting from scratch and you'd be working with a team. We are definitely looking for like a project lead who can just facilitate communications among folks. People who want to, you know, work with the panelists, and people who are interested in the outreach, and then also a tech lead to do the Zoom meetings and figure out what the best way is going to be for people to view this from afar. Stacey, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just that if you are interested in doing like some of the tech lead, but you don't feel like you already have the skills, we're willing to train if you're interested. So that's a good opportunity for more skills. No, I think that's the main thing, that if you're interested in any of the roles for any of this, that it's okay if you are interested but don't feel like you fully have everything under control, and you'll be super supported by a great team.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I add one thing? I think there's endless opportunities to do education and outreach, not just around Tacoma LNG and Indigenous rights, but just around the issues with fracked gas in general. So if you're involved in other 350 Seattle work, like we're trying to also talk about ending the use of or frack gas hookups in homes and new developments in Seattle. So there's endless opportunities to do education and outreach around the problems with gas in the organization and on this campaign.
Thanks, Val. Next, we've got artful activism. B, you want to come off your mute?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, y'all. My name's B. For those of you that don't know me, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also part of 350's leadership team and our artful activism crew. And we all know that art is a great messenger. So we're really trying to get some folks together who are interested in, keeping Tacoma's LNG in public view using art, artful expression, and creativity. So we know there's lots of different ways that we can do this. It can be things through social media, like making more coloring books or making different posts, making memes even. Those seem to make their way around really fast. There's also different methods of guerrilla art that we can use. I know in some of these photos, there's some beautiful imagery in the road right there. There's also some examples of things that we can post, share around. Yeah, so we're also looking to see if any folks are interested in stepping up more into the resistance coordinating team for art, possibly helping to facilitate some art breakout sessions during the bi-weekly meetings. And if any folks want to help lead some of these artful projects or get involved in helping out, that'd be awesome. And if there's any other ideas that folks would like to bring in, that'd be great too.
Yes, thanks, B. And I think that goes for all the teams, like bring your full self, bring your expertise, and co-create this. Let's see, next up, we've got media and communications. So that'll be Lily and or Scott.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Lily. I'm part of the Indigenous Sovereignty node that has kind of come into this work, and I'm leading our social media communications. Right now, we're kind of developing a plan to get into the hearts and minds of everybody who's impacted by the Tacoma LNG project, because the longer people go without hearing about it, the less they worry about it, the less they realize what's going on. And so it's important to be putting out posts regularly, getting letters to the editor in local newspapers, writing blogs, writing op-eds, all of this information to get everyday people who maybe haven't heard about the project aware of what's going on, and knowledgeable about the risks associated with the project, knowledgeable about the treaty rights violations that are going on. So if you're interested in joining with us on this, we'll be looking at forming, similar to this kind of Twitter storm, a group of people who want to post regularly, share other people's posts to help get the word out about this, writing great letters to the editor. Scott has a wonderful step-by-step guide that the LTE team put together to talk with people about, and making sure this information gets out there. So yeah, hope you'll want to join us.
Great, thanks, Lily. Okay.
I was just going to add that in terms of letters to the editor, there's a lot of information that was shared today. And as you think about writing a letter to the editor, think about what out of all of that information you have the most passion about. And use that as starting your initial couple of sentence paragraph to introduce your overall point to your letter to the editor. I then suggest that you, there is a 200-word limit to submitted letters. But what I would suggest is that you use that first statement and you first write out everything you want to say. And then you go back and you count the words, and then you start seeing where can I cut down, where can I make more succinct, how can I actually give it more punch by editing it. And then the second thing I would say is to run the letter by other people, because they can point out if there's any lack of clarity or unneeded points, etc.
Great, Thanks, Scott. And also there is an incredibly well-established letters to the editor toolkit that, so again, you know, and in none of these teams will you be like isolated and, you know, sort of floundering. So there's going to be plenty of support, and yeah, and if this is your first time writing an LTE, that's awesome, and give it a go. And for our last team, we've got our ad campaign, and Val's going to talk about.
Yeah, I'm Val. So we may not have $1 million to counter Puget Sound Energy's greenwashing budget, but we do have a few $1,000s from a grant that we can use to run an ad campaign to counter PSC's greenwashing. And so I'm looking to identify some people who have experience either running ad campaigns, developing creative content, doing sort of smaller scale ad buys, to work together to figure out how do we tell an aspect of this message, because we can't tell it all in a short 30-second piece, but how do we start to tell this story in a creative way and push it out to audiences that we may not otherwise reach. So Anna's gonna put a link in the chat, I think. And, oh, she's on. We're gonna send it out in the follow-up for ways to get involved with these teams, and also to identify interest in any of the lead roles. The ad campaign in particular definitely needs folks who have some experience doing that, because we wanna make sure we do it well.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Just a second. Okay, dog life, it's new to me. So thank you all so much for those summaries. And again, we're not gonna have time for breakout rooms. It's actually 1:30 right now. I know some people will have to hop off. But for next steps, we're actually gonna send out an email with all of the links and information that you're gonna need. So we'll have a listserv sign up. Today, share the social media storm, and then our next meeting is going to be Thursday the 30th at noon, so same day and time as this meeting, and we'll meet as a large group every other week. And it's really up to the teams whether or not they want to meet besides that. So watch your inbox. We are going to have the follow-up email sent by Monday, and I think that we'll probably have a link to the recorded version of this included in that email if you want to show it to anybody else. And then also really important, please fill out the sign up sheet that we're going to send out. If somebody could put that link in the chat, actually, that would be helpful. It's a Google form, and it's just got information about all of the teams. We also have some specialized roles. So if you're really into tech, if you're really into research, there are going to be places for you too. Those are a little bit less team oriented, but they still contribute a lot to the organization and the campaign as a whole. So I think we did it. I think we made it almost in time, and now we've got some time for. Do we want to stay on and take a couple more questions?
I have time to stay on for folks that wanted to stay and have a few questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop my screen share and put some of those links in the chat. So if you've got questions, you could, Val, did we have any questions that were backed up from before?
I think they're pretty specific questions around the project. I'm wondering if there's any folks on here of questions about getting involved.
While we're looking for that, I can answer the question that just popped up of who has the power. And unfortunately, there's not a decision maker that we can lean on right now. Because that court decision is going on, the power lies with the Pollution Control Hearings Board that will be the legal body listening to this case. And as is, you know, with any legal case, you can't put pressure on judges and people making judicial decisions the same way you can on, say, Governor Inslee or a legislator. So there is nobody that we can directly say, this is your job, you need to do it this way. We literally don't have somebody to do that at right now, which is why this kind of win in the court of public opinion is the best thing that we can be doing right now. And that's that intention of that we should be doing that comes from the people, you know, that are kind of helping develop strategy, that are really watching like what's the best way to support a legal process. So unfortunately, there isn't one. Did we come up with any questions about getting involved or any of the teams or anything? And we'll put all of those, we'll put those toolkits that we talked about into that email that'll go out with people Monday too. So, and that may even like help people see a little bit more to help decide like what team you want to join. And even if you ended up feeling like, oh, I could work on a couple things, that's going to be fine too, because we are meeting as a whole group at those biweekly meetings, and then we'll probably spend part of those biweekly meetings in breakout groups for different teams based on what projects they're working on, and then part of the time together learning about any updates to the campaign, kind of checking in with each other, seeing what the different groups are doing in case that we can help complement with some of the other little mini teams.
And I put the link back in the chat again for the registration for the biweekly meetings. So that'll be every other Thursday at noon through October.
And if you can't make those meetings, but you know you definitely want to get involved, don't let that stop you either, because again, you could kind of get follow-ups. You could be in contact with those different groups. Anna is our volunteer coordinator. So, you could put that into that, into the Google form that she's sending out. Hey, I can't make those meetings, but I'm interested in this and that, and that's fine too. And thank you so much for everybody getting on. I just want to say like how happy it makes my heart, how many people we had on this meeting today. And I know that there's so many people involved both on this call, you know, and not on this call, that have put in time, energy, love, sweat, potential arrest into stopping this project. And then so, you know, and to have see a lot of new faces too is really exciting. So just so grateful to everyone, and just want to also say thank you on behalf of the frontline communities in Tacoma. You know, to be fighting off these projects is really difficult in general. They fought off a giant methanol refinery literally right before this. So they've been fighting for 5-6 years against a fossil fuel project coming to their home. So having this outside resistance, and 350 Seattle has actually been hugely helpful in making sure that there is kind of a volunteer army paying attention to everything. And so it's just a something that the people in Tacoma do on a regular basis. Say thank you to all of us that are really helping hold this work, even though it's not right next to our homes.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. And I'm gonna, yeah, we will be putting out all the, we'll send out a lot of follow-up emails, Jim, and we're gonna be sending those out, I think, primarily through the Stand with Puyallup listserv, and you'll get a link to sign up to that in our follow-up email. And if you've got any questions that are specific to volunteering, I'm just posting my email address in the chat right now. So that's also on the Google form. So let me know if you've got any questions about plugging in. And thank you all so much for showing up today. This is a really important and very meaningful campaign. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, there have been a lot of wins lately, and I think that we've got some really good momentum going, and there's a lot of hope for this, built off of you know, the work that the Indigenous leadership have been doing, and people like Stacy have been, you know, really devoted and made this happen so far. And Val too, you've been involved for a really long time. So thank you all so much, and we're gonna do this thing.